Namaste and welcome to the new series of webinar entitled The Global Economic Impact of COVID-19 and Policy Options by ASEAN Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, which is a foreign policy-based think tank in Kathmandu, Nepal. In many sense, basically in the backdrop of no available vaccines and no clear exit strategy from the lockdowns, I think it is fair to say that COVID-19 pandemic has brought the extraordinary uncertainty in the global economy. Thus, predicting the sort of uncertainty with the certainty is yourself the hardest job. But having experiences and expertise in economic relief, our prominent expert around the world today help us to understand the broad repercussions of this pandemic during and post-COVID-19 era. And we'll also put forward the immediate and long-term policy measures that like how we can mitigate the economic fallout and ways and means to spur the economic recovery by bringing out the respective regional and sub-regional experiences. So joining with us today, Ambassador Ranjit sir, who is a former ambassador of India to Nepal, Vietnam, and Hungary.
Namaste.
Similarly with us, Mr. Paulo, Casaca, sir, who is the Executive Director at South Asia Democratic Forum and former member of European Parliament.
Namaste.
Similarly with us, Dr. Fabian Zuleeg, sir, who is a Chief Executive at European Policy Center. And from Nepal with us, Dr. Achyut Wagle, sir, who is a Professor of Kathmandu University School of Management. I want to welcome once again all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we have basically divided this discussion in three major parts. In first and second round, we'll try to analyze the global economic impact and policy measures that we need to adopt about 5 to 6 minutes in each round. And in third round, we'll take the questions from our attendees in this webinar. So I'd also like to request our attendees to share their questions in the Q&A box of this webinar. Just to set the tone for discussion for this first part, let me just briefly share a few words. You know that world economic output is expected to decline sharply. Different forecasts suggest that world economy will shrink by 3% in 2020, which is the kind of sharpest decline since the Great Depression of 1930s. COVID-19 is also, in fact, crossing the international trade with the disruptions in the global supply chains. Tourism and travel industries have been severely impacted due to the global travel restrictions. And different forecasts also suggest that the fall in the remittance inflow, which is going to severely impact the economy of the remittance recipient country. And we also know that prior to this pandemic, economic globalization was already facing the ample of impediments, which is resulted from the financial crisis, Brexit, US-China trade war, among others. So while talking about the long-term implications, I think we need to also look at how this pandemic is going to affect the existing domestic and international inequalities that we have. And we also and we need to also bring some fundamental structural changes in economy. That means reversing the economic globalizations and promoting the ideas of national self-interest. So after this, I'd like to request each of our prominent panelists to give us the sense about your reflections, how you perceive the economic impact of COVID-19 in global level, in short term and in long term. Maybe about 5 to 6 minutes in this first round, and then second round we'll talk about the policy measures. So maybe I can go with the alphabetical order and ask to reflect your thoughts to Achyut Wagle sir first.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Looking at the topic, I see a very big scope of great polemics when we start to talk about the whole world. But perhaps the most rational way to look into it is to acknowledge the fact that the world in every possible paradigm is not quite a very homogeneous place as we generally make it out to be. Heterogeneity is in economic terms, in demographic terms, cultural, and even in political system and governance. That is very much manifested in present dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic as well, particularly in terms of containment and control measures of the virus, and at the same time managing the different sovereign economies. So I think it would be appropriate for us to take a two-pronged approach in evaluating the both health and economic impacts and the strategies that may work to come out with this twin crisis. I would call it a twin crisis because unlike any other previous economic crisis, it is more of a health crisis and then the economic crisis. So when I say the twin approaches, so we need to develop a vision. There is a ubiquitous global trends like in transmission of the virus, the healthcare challenges, the inadequacies of the facilities and infrastructure, and the uniformly grinding halt of the almost every major economy of the world. That is, we can say, we can take a worldview on this. But having said this, we can also recognize the fact that there are deeper disparities that this COVID-19 has already exposed among the economies in terms of their availability of resources, of also economic resources, human resources, infrastructural resources, the capacity to take on the crisis, and the ensuing impact like on hunger and poverty in many of the economies. So we are basically living in two parallel worlds. So that is my kind of take on it. When I say the another aspect of it, the debate, the nature of the global debate is already dichotomous. In one set of the debate, the world, when we say world, it sounds as if we are only talking about the North America and Western Europe. Incidentally, the virus fatalities has also been highest in number in those areas, even with adjusted with the size of their population. And there is another world, which is 3/4 of the entire population that lives in scarcity, mass deprivation, and capacity constraint in every sense of the term. So looking at all these things as I have, the day the IMF came out with 6%, in worst case scenario, 6% shrinkage in the global economy, I said that is very optimistic scenario, which is agreed by the IMF managing director herself in the next day of that prediction. And it is turning out to be true. Like if you look at the last 2 quarters of economic output of the US, that has gone down up to 10%. Today we saw the data from Germany. The German economy in the last quarter has shrunk by more than 2%. And then if you look at sectoral, some sectors, global sectors that contribute to the economy, they have got very least chance of instantly bouncing back to business. So in my calculation, it is going to be mother of all depression, far deeper than the Great Depression itself of 1930s, where we didn't have much of the data at that time. And we are talking about the different size of the economy altogether. At that time, we had the $2.25 trillion economy. And now we are talking about approximately $90 trillion economy. So I think we are talking in entirely different paradigm, different kind of reality. So, and then the uncertainty that looms so large in every possible aspect, so simultaneously flattening the epidemiological and recession curves is the greatest challenge. So that is, and then there are some other aspects are coming in. We have started a debate of like whether the globalization will survive, whether the global supply chain will remain intact. What about the re-emergence of a new type of protectionism in trade? Will that survive? Is it how long the crisis will persist? If you believe in the prediction of the World Health Organization yesterday, we need to probably cohabit with it. We need to learn to live with it. And then at the same time, the quality of leadership of certain countries has also been tested. We are saying a large economies that have performed better in terms of managing the spread of virus and opening of the lockdown are led by women leaders. And there are some leaders who have completely ruled out the evidences that is coming out from the science. And then they are now probably facing the consequences. And in other economies, we have seen a lot of exodus of the workers from the cities to the villages, where the choice between dying by virus and dying from hunger is turning out to be the largest trade of life for them. So this is how it looks in general, I guess.
Thank you, Dr. Achyut. So I'd like to also welcome Ambassador Tariq Karim sir from Bangladesh. Sir, welcome. Sir. Thank you.
Sorry, I had to overcome some technical problems.
Now, I'd like to request Dr. Fabian sir for your take. Dr. Fabian sir.
I'm sorry, I had a bit of a technical issue there as well. So yes, I think a number of important points have been raised, but thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this. I think the first point I would make is that we are still at the beginning of this crisis. And that means there's an enormous amount of uncertainty. We don't know exactly what is going to come next. We don't know, for example, in which way the health crisis is going to develop, whether we are going to see a second wave, whether we are going to see a vaccine coming online at some point. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is even greater when it comes to the economic impact. Of course, we've seen some of the economic impact already, but for me, there are at least 4 different phases in this crisis, and all of those phases will have different impacts. We have the first phase, which is the acute health crisis, and clearly that is something which has to be brought under control. Before that is under control, no other measures are going to work. That is the absolute priority. And of course, it is also linked to a lot of personal tragedy. But then once that is under control, there's a question of how do you exit the lockdown? What is the right path for that? In what way can you manage to minimize the negative impact without risking a recurrence of the pandemic? And this is something which governments are struggling with all across the world. There's a lot of pressure now on governments to come out of the lockdowns so that economies can restart. But there's a huge danger associated with that. So clearly, there will be a number of measures taken, but it also depends on the capacity of countries to deal with that phase. So, do countries have the capacity to track, to trace, to test, so that they can ensure that if there is a localized reoccurrence, then to control it and to quarantine people. Then there's a phase which hopefully will come towards the end of this year, which is a form of rebound. The moment you're starting to relax the severe restrictions we are seeing now, a number of businesses will go back to work. So there will be a rebound of some kind. The question is the strength of that rebound. Are we going to go back to anything like before the crisis? Of course not. That is very unlikely. But also that rebound is going to be different between different countries. It will come at a different point in time, and it will have a different strength. And then we are facing the long-term economic crisis. And there, I think we are facing something which is much more like a depression than a recession. Because what this crisis is doing is not only having a short-term cyclical impact, it has a long-term structural impact. Things are changing quite fundamentally in our economies, and that will have a very long-term effect. Just to give one example, we will have in a number of different sectors a huge amount of excess capacity. We have already seen that, for example, in the aviation business, where some of the major players around the world are shedding something like 30% of their staff. They are recognizing that the capacity which they have at the moment is far too big for the post-COVID world. So the question is, how is that kind of impact going to be distributed? Which countries will be able to retain more of these kind of sectors? Which countries will lose more? And that will also depend on the capacity of government. We will have government much more involved in the private economy than we have seen for a long time. We are already seeing that with, at least in some countries, massive state aid. We see that with direct governments taking direct equity in companies, and governments will be direct much more of the economy going forward. So the role of government will change, more will be demanded of government, but at the same time, government will also be weakened by this crisis. We will see that, for example, debt levels are going to increase very substantially, that the support for those people who need the support most will have to increase quite significantly across all countries. So we're seeing big pressures on government at the same time as they're taking a bigger role. All of that points, in my view, to a very differentiated impact. So we're going to have a negative impact across the board, but it's going to hit certain countries, certain regions, certain sectors, certain groups in society much more than it hits others. So this will be, in my view, the dominating theme going forward, that we have this different impact, that will put strain also on the international system. I think we are already seeing some tendencies towards my country first. Let's make sure that I can provide something for my citizens first. And that, I think, is a tendency which is going to continue. And that, for me, is the big paradox of this crisis, because in many ways, what the crisis shows is actually that we need more cross-border cooperation, that we need more global cooperation to deal with these kind of challenges. But the pressure, the political pressure in many countries is going to lead us directly in the opposite direction.
Thank you, sir. Now, I'd like to request Paulo Casaca, sir, for your take.
Master, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here with you, sharing my thoughts. For those of you who have not met me before, I am the director of South Asia Democratic Forum. Is the only think tank that is specifically focalized on South Asia in Brussels. This economic collapse that has been described and viewed in a general perspective before, I think that we have to concentrate on two very important specific features of the present crisis. Well, the first one is that we are facing more psychological than a viral impact. The issue has been put by many experts, but I would refer to the most well-known health historian of France, Olivier Faure, that made a comparison of data and concluded that, for instance, the epidemics of Hong Kong flu of '68 during the crucial 2 months of highest development actually had a higher mortality rate than the present pandemic, just to give an example. Another example comes from my own country. I am from Portugal, and both main towns, Lisbon and Porto, 2 medical research teams got to the conclusion in independent studies that the fatality rates due to the panic, that is, those people that were terrified of going to the hospital and so did not go there either when they had a crisis or because they were supposed there on a regular basis. If this mortality rate from the panic was 4 to 5 times higher than the mortality rate from the virus, which is absolutely enormous. And this is only one of the several side effects of these policies that we have been putting in place, and this sort of panic that we have been spreading all over. And some people, you know, equate the issue as, well, but we cannot put economics in front of health. Whatever it costs, it's necessary to look at health. But this is absolutely erroneous. Even in pure health terms, everything indicates that this overreaction is actually costing more lives than the virus itself, which is absolutely extraordinary, and that should make people reflect upon what are we dealing with. And of course, a lot of this has to do with a second factor I would like to highlight, which is disinformation. Well, disinformation is not, as well, is not a specificity of the present pandemic. We only have to remember the Spanish flu. I always like to remember that the reason why it is called the Spanish flu, because it has nothing to do with Spain. Actually, Spain was one of the countries that was more lately touched by the epidemic. So why is it called Spanish flu? Well, because it was in the context of the First World War, and there was censorship, war censorship everywhere in the countries involved in the war. Well, Spain was one of the relatively few European countries that was neutral, and so had no censorship. And so they spoke about it. And as they spoke about it, it became the Spanish flu. As simple as that. This makes us remember what really happened this time, you know, because in the beginning, the World Health Organization minimized immensely the crisis. Said, well, this famous tweet in the middle of January, oh, well, there is no proof of any contamination from human to human. The minimization was complete, and actually goes up to our day. I mean, presently, in the middle of May, after all these months, we do not know for sure where did it start, this pandemic, who was the famous person number 0, how did it start, we really don't know. We know that the World Health Organization made a lot of research in the field, sent missions. The result, we don't know. All these months afterwards. And after this first moment where there was a minimization, then suddenly the trend was to exactly the opposite. Panic everywhere. Well, prepare yourselves, it's going to be tremendous, horrendous, so on and so on and so on. Well, just one of the facts that came to light at the same time, you know, in March, but nobody really cared very much with it, is that only because of microparticles of the air pollution, that well, Delhi is, well, Kathmandu as well. Actually, Delhi is more well known for its air pollution, but I can tell you that my experiences in Kathmandu were perhaps even worse than in Delhi. Well, but the estimation is that annually 9 million people are dying out of these microparticles. Well, this pandemic up to now 300,000. Well, not comparable, but nobody cares less with, for instance, this issue of the microparticles as so many other issues that are so important in health terms. So, and of course, besides that, there is a lot of other types of disinformation. I think it makes absolutely no sense to make everything dependent on this vaccination. You know, there is an enormous propaganda machine on the vaccination, but after all, we read some independent experts, those who have nothing to do with commercial interests and all these trillions, it's really trillions that are being invested in this machine of the vaccination, and they say, well, it's not at all sure that there will be ever a vaccination. Not even the question in time. I mean, if there will be ever, if it will work. I mean, nothing is known. So why should we be dependent on something that is so so unpredictable and so unlikely to happen in due time? Why was such propaganda made against this chloroquine? I mean, trying to convince us that this was killing everybody. I mean, this is completely absurd. I mean, this is one of the eldest medicine that have been around for at least 70 years. Millions and millions of people have been taking it in mass quantities, and now suddenly, after 70 years, no problem. Well, there is a lot of problem. Well, because it got into the way of some important business from big pharmaceutical companies. So disinformation has been a crucial issue. And this points out to what I would like to develop in the second phase, which is the response to the present economic collapse as to stand on trust. And what we have to see is exactly what have we to do to give trust to the public opinion. But I would stay here for the time.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Now I'd like to request Ambassador Ranjit for your take.
Thank you.
No. Yeah. Okay, Ranjit.
Is it? Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to AIDIA for inviting me to participate. And very interesting presentations have already been made. This crisis has a huge humanitarian dimension, and millions of families have been pushed deeper into poverty and despair. So it is not only a health crisis, there's a huge economic crisis. And this has both global economic impact, and I think it has major political impacts in terms of global geopolitics. And I think, given that there is no cure, no vaccine, no medicines right now, the only option seems to be social distancing and lockdown. So the choice for countries, and especially for developing countries or relatively poorer countries, is between lives and livelihoods. The more you lock down your economy, the greater are livelihoods at threat, and they can in turn lead to huge misery and poverty. So reference has been made to the huge economic catastrophe. People are talking about prolonged recession, it's not depression. Unemployment rates in many countries have peaked. Both global demand and supply have fallen very significantly. And, sectors such as tourism, civil aviation, construction, financial services, electricity, automobiles, severely hit. Countries like India, Bangladesh, and Nepal have also been affected by the decline in remittances and the problems faced by our workers, migrant workers, especially in the Gulf countries, given that oil prices have fallen so much, of course, this benefits our balance of payments, but has also resulted in a lot of problems in the Gulf countries, leading to retrenchment and repatriation of workers. In a country like India, for instance, the backbone of our manufacturing sector is what we call micro, small, and medium enterprises. And they are in acute crisis. The only saving grace that we see from the perspective where I'm sitting is that agriculture is relatively unaffected. And this is a huge boon. There are a couple of trends in international economics and politics that I think, they existed before the COVID crisis happened, but I think these trends are accelerating. And I would briefly like to refer to some of these. And I think the first is the US-China trade conflict. And this is now metamorphosing into a broader confrontation, not only about COVID and its origins, etc., but there is also political contestation, security issues in many parts of the world, including in Asia, for instance, in the South China Sea. The second trend is also a retreat from multilateralism. We saw this with the United States, particularly under President Trump, withdrawing, for instance, from the Paris Agreement on climate change. And now, of course, there is a lot of skepticism about the effectiveness of institutions such as the WHO and the World Trade Organization. The Security Council was extremely slow in responding to this global emergency and very inadequate. The next trend that I see is that, I think the image of both, these major powers, the US and China, have been dented by this pandemic. Already, as I said, US was retreating from, the world system as we know it, and going in for policies such as America First. But, the manner in which the virus has been handled in the United States, I think has raised a lot of question marks in the minds of people all over the world. And as for China, I think there are a lot of concerns about the lack of transparency in the manner in which, this virus was handled. And yet another perception related to this also is that, I might be wrong, but my broad sense is that Asian countries perhaps have fared slightly better than, countries in the United States and in Europe in terms of swiftly handling the pandemic through, lockdown measures. Countries such as China, Vietnam, Korea have lifted the lockdown and economic activity has resumed. So while there is a lot of talk about, global supply chains obviously have been affected, and there are, there are demands now that you cannot be too dependent on any one country for supplies of raw materials and components. You need to diversify your sources of supply, and hence there may be a move away from global supply chains to more regional supply chains. If not, generally speaking, at least in some critical sectors, such as health equipment and medical supplies. Also, if there is a shift of some industries away from China, that might create opportunities in some other countries. We also hear talk about economic self-reliance, again, in some critical sectors. So clearly, I think the world of globalization is going to be impacted very significantly. Related to this is also global financial systems. I think, the days when the Bretton Woods systems and Western financial institutions controlled international finance and liquidity are over. India, for instance, has received from both the AIIB and the New Development Bank greater assistance than we have from the World Bank with regard to the management of COVID. And while the US dollar remains to be the dominant currency, it's the world's reserve currency, global transactions are now being denominated in the Chinese yuan. There have been reports of a new digital currency being tested in China. So, the global financial system is also, there are a lot of major developments. So clearly we are moving to a more divided, less united world. And my sense is that, the days of unabashed globalization are over. We will not go back to that period. One last point before closing, and this is also, COVID-19 has huge impact in our lives, in the way we relate to other human beings, in the way we, conduct our work and business. We are now sitting in different parts of the world and having this very interesting conversation virtually. So we are moving to more virtual contact and meetings. We will be moving increasingly now to a world of e-learning, e-medicine, e-commerce, work from home. And these are some of the emerging trends. And obviously they will have huge impact, on life as we know it. Last point, and that also is that the role of the state, as was mentioned earlier, is certainly increasing. Whether after this pandemic it will go back to what it used to be, I'm not so sure. Also, some of the tools that are being used to monitor persons affected by the pandemic require greater electronic surveillance. So, these are certain aspects that also might affect our world of the future. So I think I'll stop at this point.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Now I'd like to request Ambassador Tariq, sir, for your reflection regarding repercussions of the COVID-19 in global economy.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this, and I'm pleased to be here and to meet such a lot of distinguished people. It's an important subject, but I think, and I agree largely with most of the previous speakers' points that were made. Of course, I am looking inside out being in Bangladesh. So my thoughts and my reactions to many of the things come from as I see the situation here and how it is affecting. Now, until 3 months ago, we were very proudly thumping our chest and saying, we are doing better than everyone else. We are headed to go to 8% growth, etc. And even the ADB was lauding us. I think in early March, I read a report saying Bangladesh is going to top 7%. And I was wondering where that's coming from. Now, what I'm seeing now, there's not just a connection between lives, the choice between lives and livelihoods. There is a connection now between livelihoods, so translating and impacting on social stability, which in turn is going to affect the politics. We don't have a network of social safety nets as the more advanced countries have. So there people will not go totally hungry. The state has already a system which has been in place for decades. Okay, for better or for worse, they will still manage to cope. We are struggling to find out a system. What are our main sources of revenue in Bangladesh? Is the ready-made exports. Most 81% of the exports comes from one industry. That is basically the country is a huge tailoring shop, which stitches things together and sends it out to the rest of the world. Now, somebody has to buy it on the other side. And if they stop buying it, our garment factories already are running at just about 30% with orders that were there and which have not been cancelled. About 70% of the orders are already on hold or with the threat of, that you have to bring prices down, etc., whatever it is. So that's number one. Number two, our foreign exchange revenue is basically equal. The reserves that we have is basically equal to the remittance that we get from about 10 million workers who are outside, of whom about several million are in the Gulf states. And the Gulf states already are facing problems. Workers are coming back. They're coming back having lost their savings because they have not been paid. And they have to be rehabilitated as well. They are not bringing back any assets with them. They are bringing back liabilities with them. How do you absorb those workers? The people who have lost their jobs, the vast majority of the people who were doing okay were in the informal sector or the service sector, not in the RMG industries or elsewhere, okay? So the RMG, the industrial units will be able to put something together. The government will try to bail them out. They have to pay 60%, 70% of wages to the workers, but that will depend on how long they can keep working. If the spinning mills and the knitting wheels and the sewing mills do not run, then they'll have to find other occupations. Number two, the people who have lost everything, I see a new class of, I literally say this very deliberately, a new class of beggars out. In the last 2 months, I have ventured out about 3 or 4 times to certain areas just to take out and buy some grocery from different areas. I see a new class of beggars out there. They are not people who are the normal run-of-the-mill beggars. They were not used to begging, but they are there because the hunger in the food is impelling them to come out and lower their own self-dignity. Okay, they are not, and I have, about 75 plus years of accumulated memories and experiences from the days of the Bengal famine to the famine that happened in 74 in Bangladesh, to the disturbances from civil war, etc. I'm looking at these things from these experiences which will share us. These people now use a tone, undertone, a language which is not docile anymore. Because the digital revolution, everybody has a mobile phone, and many mobile phones have limited smartphone capabilities. So they are also open to information and equally to misinformation and disinformation. And if most of the workers in the garment factories have not been paid 2 months rent, now finally the factories are beginning to catch up and pay some. But some of the factories, they've had demonstrations in the last several weeks. Now, if the government is not able to get food out first to these who are totally dispossessed, then I see it translating into something which could go out of control. So if social unrest goes beyond the tipping point, then you will have political unrest. And if you have political unrest, and then the nature of our political system is a democracy, but we are all imperfect democracies in different stages of imperfection. Okay, how are we going to tackle that? That's another factor coming in. So as I see it, I think immediate crisis that the government has to face is right now we are nowhere near the peak of this. We are just beginning to approach that. The more tests we are carrying out, and still our testing is one of the lowest in the world, even in South Asia, okay? The more we are finding that there are so many more COVID cases happening. And in a sense, what that is doing is, yes, it impacts our minds. It also creates an add to the panics. And in a sense, people without food, it's not that we don't have food. We have to tackle our own local supply chain internally. Food rotting in the orchards are bumper harvests coming in, pineapples, oranges, mangoes about to come in, but they are not being transported. If they don't get to the market, who's going to sell them? And even if they get to the market, if let us say 60% of the people don't have the capacity to buy it, who's going to buy it? Okay, so as one of the speakers said earlier, I agree that the governments will probably have to take over more of the role of arbiter in society and providing social security. Newspapers are now quoting that rich people are managing to enlist themselves because of their connections in various places as people entitled for fixed prices of rice and other stuff. which is going to fuel the resentment. Okay, so there are various things happening here. We are not in a society, we don't have the luxury that the Western world in Europe or US or everywhere else have. Yes, we also did, there was initially a complacency. This cannot touch us, there have been epidemics before, it will go. Then when we did wake up, the government did start taking actions, but translating the policies into actions, we've discovered that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Each digit in the one hand doesn't know what the next digit is doing. There is a severe problem of coordination. Now, ultimately we will solve it out. I mean, if we have one thing going for us, we have proved over the last 50 years that we can innovate and overcome crises, but we pay a price in the process. How we will emerge from this? I see the globalization, which was spawned off basically by the New World Order. I call it actually the post-colonial, new colonial, post-war, new Westphalian disorder that emerged after 1945. We're still suffering from the angst and the pain and the new identities with which nation states came up, but they haven't yet settled into their states of identity that they defined 75 years ago, okay? Now, apart from that, in the subcontinent, we used to be one integrated economic and ecological system. That was, before partition, our GDP was something else, part of the global. Even if we look at, Nepal, where you're sitting, Nepal and Bhutan and the Northeast and everyone else, the highest GDP was in what was the Bengal presidency. Highest per capita GDP was in Shillong, but the minute we severed those connections, we severed the economic unity and the ecological integrity, we started paying a price. Now, I see a shift away from the globalization that was spawned off by the New World Order of 1947. I see already the strongest, staunchest champions of the capitalist free enterprise. The United States is shrinking into me first, America first, I first, ourselves first, grabbing vaccines where it is coming. It is going to be a big tussle between France and the US on who is going to get the first vaccines being produced, even though the outfit and the factory in France. So all these things there's going to be a lot of turbulence. I think first, each country has to look to stabilize. That's going to be the first order. We are not going to get back to that export-oriented economy that we had earlier, not relying on garments, because we will have many competitions now. Politics will play into it, different political combinations and equations will come into play in these trade-offs. Number two, I think there is a welcome change, and I think it will depend on whether India takes it forward or it's just lip service. That we are looking back to within South Asia. So when Prime Minister Modi, until 4 months ago, I would say, SARC was dead. It had been consigned to the grave. Now, when Mr. Modi revives this, I see this as a welcome sign and realization that first we have to survive nationally and then regionally before we can reestablish our global links. Okay, the global links, the factors of production, the markets, the chains that existed do not exist. Imagine what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. The first plunge that took place was the economy, because all the factors of production were scattered in the different parts of the empire. Now I see a certain similar global fragmentation perhaps happening, unless we can we are nowhere near the global governance system. We can renegotiate what we put in place 75 years ago. I agree that the world order shaped by the Bretton Woods Agreement and everything else, I think needs a drastic revisiting. Will that happen? I don't know. Everything is up in the air. I think number one, if our people can somehow survive and the volcano, that is the lava that is underneath, doesn't burst open, that we stabilize locally, then we have to look to the region. Food security and health security will be number one, which will be connected with ensuring employment and economic security.
Okay, sir.
Unless you can get that, you will not be able to come to the third.
Okay.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Sir. Thank you. Before proceeding to the second round of discussion, I'd like to request all of our participants to put forward their questions in chat box, or if you wish to ask directly, then you can also just write your name, and then we can allow you to ask the questions to our respective panelists after this second round of discussion. So in this second part, I think we all agree that saving lives and livelihood both are equally important. So in this second round of discussion, I'd like to request our panelists to suggest some proactive, immediate and long-term global policy response to deal with this global public health crisis. How do you view the considerations of reopening the economy? What is your reflection about the relief packages introduced by the different governments and then international financial institutions? Or what should be the priorities to focus areas to minimize the economic fallout or roadmap for the recovery? Or broadly, what should be the good economic responses to deal with these hard times? So once again, can I start from Dr. Achyut, sir?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it has been a very interesting discussion. There are not much disagreement to whatever has been said. Of course, the COVID-19 has impact on geostrategic, geopolitical, and geoeconomic spheres. We have got probably there is a debate on reshuffling of global economic and thereby global strategic order. And then when it comes to economy, we are on the same page, I guess, that there will be, everybody is agreeing there will be decline of GDP, disruption on the both internal and external supply chains. And the era, two things I think I'd like to beg to differ a bit on the complete collapse of globalization, because the level of interdependence we have created, particularly in the production system and trade system of comparative advantage and production system of multinational supply line-based production process. So that cannot probably be completely replaced by the kind of nationalistic and protectionist ideas. And that is one. Of course, the rhetoric of beg or die never type economic diplomacy might come out. That is true. And the one of the very striking, very striking point that is coming out is the inequality, like Ambassador Tariq very aptly signaled, is that the new kind of beggars, that new terminology has also been coined these days called precarious proletariats. That precarious proletariat are coming. And that is leading to sort of governments to take up a new Keynesian and new Marxist approaches of redefining the social state with the diminishing role of the market. That is another very key dimension. Now we are very often seeing we are emerging as the new normal. As I see, the definition of the new normal itself is going to be multifaceted and then the contextual. One new normal would be we have to cohabit with the COVID. That we at least need to assume that we need to live with COVID for at least some years until the vaccines and cure is invented. And I doubt if all the poor countries would be able to afford to that vaccine as soon as it comes out in the market. So another is overexploitation of the nature, degradation of environment can can change. That is also a debate I see going on. And the digital prospect of a digital economy is we are very widely debating. But again, the question of digital divide, the access of the to the digital kind of the platforms to the people, and the infrastructure, the quality of infrastructure we have developed, the access of the access to those infrastructure is going to be a big challenge. And then we also see the grand narratives coming about the end of market capitalism, resurfacing of a tough regulatory regime, and the compromise of freedom. And we are very often hearing about now, when it comes to the contact tracing, the digital devices are used, and there is already a debate where our privacy would be protected. So these are the larger pictures. But when we actually come to the policy prescription side, I think we have got very clear priorities. For the countries like Professor Tariq said, we sit on a volcano. The testing, that should be the priority. Then it can come to tracing and then treating. And the second priority parallelly should be the most of the debate I see is the economy will rebound when the actually virus threat is over. It is not the case. We should have, the government should have simultaneous strategies to revive the economy, like many economies have done. We can follow the very nice trajectories followed by Germany, followed by France, followed by South Korea, followed by Taiwan. So I think we have to do that. So in terms of the policies, I would say the prioritization of expenses. If we talk about the fiscal space we have in South Asia in terms of the foreign debt, we still in a comfortable position. We are not being able to. Many countries like India has just come out with about $270 billion of stimulus package. Other countries are still struggling to have cash incentives. And the key of all fiscal policies to focus on should be somehow maintaining the moderate level of consumption. Otherwise, we will not be able to prevent the hunger and will not able to grease the economic wheel of any particular economy. When coming to the monetary policy can only be effective at a time, because as we said, the remittances, like countries like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, even Sri Lanka, they have got a huge dependence on the remittances. If we talk about Nepal, it finances, the remittances finances almost 2/3 of our deficit trade, which is very huge. So the official development assistance will be shrinking. I don't see any instant cross-border investments coming about. The most worrisome, if you look at the Indian economy very recently, which is the largest economy in the region and the fifth largest and would be third largest economy in the world. If you look at the data of just last 1 month, at least $15 billion has flown out of the economy because of the fears of prolonged lockdown. So and even if the lockdown is lifted, the capital is likely to fly from these economies to safer places where the risk is low. So that is another dimension. And for the countries like ours, we have a huge responsibility of managing the migrant workers. We enjoyed the remittances, but now there is millions, virtually millions of our workers trying to come back home. Even to facilitate their travel from their now hosting countries to their hometowns is going to be a very huge task. When there are a lot of already sort of infected people. You cannot say you are infected and cannot come to your home country and hometown. So our health system are automatically going to be overwhelmed by that. And another very key aspect exposed by the COVID crisis is our pattern of urbanization, urban facilities, urban infrastructure, and more seriously, urban poverty. So you see how cities are so inhospitable to the working class population. Immediately there is a crisis, there is no food for them, there is no shelter for them, and there is no transportation for them to go back to their villages. So if I borrow a terminology from the Dependency School of Economics, so there is a huge movement from core to the periphery. If we want to restart the economy, will those workers come back instantly to the cities? Will they feel comfortable? So having said that, it sets all new priorities for us. We need to recalibrate our fiscal policies. And then as a universal case, I would say the investment for better healthcare facilities is going to be key. And economies like ours, it is also an opportunity for modernizing the agriculture. For some years, we are seeing some deficit of labor supply in the agricultural sector. And the restart of the digital economy, of course, is there. And then the one very interesting aspect I see is the depletion in our very rich social capital everywhere. So whether we call it a stigma on the virus, stigma attached to the virus, but we have somehow living in the new civilization, I would say. We have forgotten to go to temples, mosque, church for whatever reason of transmission. So probably our faith system is changing. So social capital, social cohesion, the cooperation among each other is somehow also been problematic. How we can revive that social capital is going to be, may not be a directly economic issue, but the overall policy issue also need to look into that. I think I have to stop there.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to use Dr. Fabian for your take about the policy measures that we need to take.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think it is very difficult to determine what the right policy measures are, not least because what we're talking about is mitigation of a negative effect. We are not going to be in a position where the economies will turn up anytime soon. So in many ways, we're back to that paradox that the more governments will do, the less effect you will see. And there will be a question where in a number of countries, people will raise the issue that maybe government has done enough. But here, particularly when we're looking at the health impact, we have to, in some way, look at the counterfactual. We have to look at how many unnecessary deaths have been avoided by the actions which have been taken. And some of that we will only know sometime in the future when we can actually compare the normal death rates with the ones which have been in place at the moment, and when we can have a comparison also between countries. At the moment, it's very difficult to determine how successful the different measures are. But in the short term, we have to be following a precautionary approach, and that means firefighting. It means that we have to deal with the most acute issues. That is, on the one hand, the health issue, the pandemic itself, where we will have to continue to have the measures in place to ensure that the reinfection rate is going down, that we continue to have it under control, that we also continue to be in a situation where health systems can cope with the current situation. And in the short term for the economy, it also means firefighting. It means keeping as many businesses alive, keeping as many people in employment as we possibly can. And some of the measures which are being taken now are about essentially bridging this period, making sure that people, even if they're not working at the moment, have the possibility to go back into the jobs which they had before the crisis. But those are the short-term measures. And I think what we have to think about is how these will have to change when we're looking at the longer term. The longer term measures are not going to be the same kind of measures. They are not going to be so much about firefighting. They are going to be about a new stimulus, providing an impetus to the economies so that they restart. But it will also be about dealing with the structural changes which come through from these crises. Many negative structural changes. So as I already mentioned, we will have excess capacity in a number of sectors. So what happens, for example, if there is a fall in global demand for aviation? We will have to then see how that plays out in terms of the jobs in that sector. If 30–40% of demand is gone for the airline business, that will have a major long-term impact on a number of different places. We also have to see that in some areas, keeping people in the jobs which they had before the crisis is not going to be helpful. They are not going to go back to the jobs which were there before. So we have to also find new employment, and there are also some opportunities with that. Certainly when we're looking at the transformation which is needed, then the transformation towards more digital, more sustainability is something where in some areas we've actually made great advantage in this crisis. But a lot of this will also depend on the capacity of governments, both in terms of their governance capacity, but also in terms of their financial capacity, their fiscal capacity. Tax takes are going to go down globally. There's no question that governments will be more challenged. We will have governments across the board having higher debt, having to deal with the implications of that. So we are in a very difficult situation. And that for me also means that we have to look at this globally because we have an interdependence at the global level, which will continue. And here, what we are going to see happening in some countries will have an impact on everyone else. And we have to find ways of also cooperating. Now, for me, that means globalization is not dead, rather the opposite. We have a globalized world, and that is not going to change. The question is what the nature of that globalization is going to be, not whether it exists or not. And for me, the danger is that we have a tendency towards a much more nationalistic globalization, that countries will try to extract as much as possible out of these globalized processes for themselves as they possibly can. And that will, of course, favor those who have the greatest means, who have the greatest power, who are able to direct the global system in the way which they mean. So using, for example, trade flows, investment flows, to leverage what kind of policy action they want to see in other countries. And for that, I think we have to work globally together to find ways of strengthening the multilateral system, strengthening the global cooperation mechanisms, which have not performed very well in this crisis. G20 has not been an effective forum for the kind of things which we need. And I think this is a major task, which will be more difficult given that if we're looking at the leading powers in the world, they are not necessarily very committed to this kind of agenda. But that, for me, strengthens even more the case for the remainder of the world to come together and try to work out a path by which we don't have a situation where, for example, any medical advances which are being developed are only available to the few rather than to the many.
Okay, so thank you. Now, I'd like to request Paulo Casaca sir for your response.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to depart from Ambassador Karim final words about redefining or reinventing Bretton Woods. Well, I hope that we will not have to go through what preceded Bretton Woods. I think that this would not really be very good to the world. But I think he is right when he is pointing out to a necessary redefinition of our world order that was eroded by a very large number of factors that are more evident now because of the present pandemic crisis, but that are not caused necessarily because of this pandemic crisis. And I think that, as I was saying in my preceding intervention, that trust is everything, is really the most important thing. I mean, it's a bit useless, in my opinion, to be making speculation. Well, there will be a big recovery, there will not be a big recovery, this will be like that or like that, this or that. It depends on the trust. And the trust has to start in the international governance structure that has to be seen as highly competent, independent from specific geopolitical or commercial interests, transparent, subject to checks and balances, and with a robust protection against conflict of interests. This is exactly what we are lacking for the World Health Organization, but elsewhere as well. That's the key issue. Will we be able to do it or not? From this will depend a lot our capacity to have a strong recovery. And this trust also depends on us to have a balanced and reasoned appreciation of the challenges we are facing. I think that we have been seeing in the last few years the use and abuse of fear-mongering tactics in the most diverse aspects of life. Actually, Professor Didier Raoult, who is an eminent microbiologist, epidemiologist, and doctor that has been quite on the forefront, because he has shown that there is a medication, there is a protocol that alleviates considerably the impact of this virus. A lot of propaganda has been done against it, but I think that this is a crucial message. It exists. And we should follow it. It's not a hopeless war. It's not an illness that does not have an answer. But some years ago, just in 2016, he wrote a book in French. I suppose it does not exist in English. Stop Having Fear. That really he anticipated what was to come with this pandemic. Because we have been abusing fear all the time, stressing everything that is going wrong, the climate change to whatever else, and never going to what has been going in the good direction. And I think our leadership has to stop these fear-mongering tactics and should underline the long-term practices that might attain good results. And the long-term, because health is not something that you just cure with a magic. This issue of the vaccination is really one of the least interesting and the least important and the least strategically that we should be focused on the issue of health. To keep health in the planet, we have first to provide sanitation and education, to protect the environment, and to promote a good and balanced diet and activity. This should be, by the way, the priorities of the World Health Organization, and that's with these sort of policies that we will keep a healthy planet. Of course, a planet that did not discover the perpetual life, but that might be much more healthy than it has been up to now. Looking, for instance, I gave the example a while ago. There is no way that the present pandemic will cause as many victims as the microparticles in the air pollution are causing. Why are we so focused on one thing and couldn't care less on the other? Makes no sense. It's not rational. It's not balanced, a balanced way of looking at our issues. And here we come to this issue of globalization. Globalization, without this globalization, of course it is possible. If it is possible that countries will close more and more on themselves. Ambassador Karim spoke about the example of the Soviet Union. I think it's a very good example. I think, if we will, there are many others, like the borders that happened after the First World War, or the example you gave as well, the partition that destroyed. I actually passed a year ago in the area you just mentioned, this corridor where you are between Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, and the northeast of India, and it's really impressive. And of course, that this sort of rupture is very detrimental to every sort of development. And so I think that the best is to have a globalization, but a globalization that will have different rules and that we can trust. And that's on the basis where stimulus packages will be very much welcome. But these stimulus packages, a reference has been made to the package announced by Prime Minister Modi on just a few days ago, which is absolutely impressive. And I hope it will be done, and I hope it will result, but it will have to count on a new trust from the population. And without this reform I've been speaking about, I don't think we will have this trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Ranjit, perfect.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's been, very, very interesting discussion, and we've covered so many aspects. And, coming to policy options, I can look at broadly two sets of policy options. First is how to tackle the immediate humanitarian crisis. And the second set is sort of medium to longer term options. And I think the immediate crisis is of huge proportions. Millions upon millions of people have lost their jobs. They're, returning home to their villages in very pathetic condition. So I think the need of the hour, without bothering about, deficit financing and what is going to happen, I think the need of the hour is actually to ensure that these people are fed, that they have enough means by which to survive and subsist. Otherwise, as we will be faced with the kind of problems that Ambassador Tariq Karim was mentioning. And so I think, transfers in cash, in kind, especially when our granaries are overflowing, is critical. And, in India, we have taken some steps in that direction. One problem that we in India are now facing is that, a lot of the workers in our small enterprises are returning to their villages. And this is the time that we are now opening up from the lockdown, or easing the lockdown and reviving economic activity. So there's going to be a mismatch. How will your economic activity resume to the extent that you want it to resume if a lot of your workers are returning to their villages and there is no guarantee that they're going to come back, given the kind of experience that they have had with this crisis. So I think, the two most critical issues, I think, are A, to look after those that have been most severely affected, and also to look after the medium and small enterprises by ensuring that there is enough liquidity in the system. And reference was made to the economic package. It's almost 10% of India's GDP that was announced some days ago, and we do hope very much that it will ameliorate the suffering and assist in the resumption of economic activity. Now, coming to the second set of policy options, the medium to the longer term options, I also agree that global problems need global solutions. No one country can resolve this issue. Even on the health issue, no one country can develop the vaccine by itself or develop a cure or market it. If you have cures that are developed, you have to ensure that these are available all over the world. So clearly you need greater, not less, multilateral engagement, global agreements, to address these are existential challenges. And so we really have to strengthen our global order. Of course, the global order has to reflect present day realities. Whether it is the Bretton Woods institutions, they must accept the reality of China and India today, for instance, in the global economic order, or the institutions of the United Nations. So these institutions need to be reformed to reflect current realities, and that is one way of ensuring that they will be effective. We in India have been working at various levels bilaterally. Reference was made to the discussion within SAARC. A COVID fund has been established, and regular virtual meetings are being organized in different forums, including, for instance, what is known as the Quad. And the idea is really to share experiences and best practices in terms of not only dealing with the health emergency, but also the economic problems that have intensified in its wake. One last point, some mention, I also referred to, what is going to happen to these global supply chains. Is there a possibility that with countries moving inwards, you would have more localized or more regional supply chains? Would there be more self-reliant economic policies? I think these are issues that have to be examined in some detail, and depending on the manner in which things develop globally, I think each of our economies would have to adapt and ensure that we are not negatively impacted by some of these trends, and in fact we can convert challenge into opportunity by becoming new centers, or by getting new industries, new manufacturing facilities in our societies. So I think I'll stop with those words. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Ambassador Tariq, sir, your response.
Just a few quick points. When I said that globalization is, when I referred to globalization, I did not mean to imply that it is dead. It's not dead. It can never be dead, because what's there, the genie is out of the bottle. We cannot put it back in. It is a globalized world. I think we will redefine what it means to each of us. That's what I really, there's always been a debate on globalization between the South and the North. That debate will come open with new facets now. So I think we will, but I think immediately, the immediate term problems will be all local. First, unless we can stabilize the situation locally, we will not, countries like ours will not be in a position even to think globally, because everywhere people are hunkering down. I rely on 81% of my export revenues from one sector alone. That sector is finished. I don't see it reviving in the next year or 2 years. What are you going to do there? How are we going to replace that? Okay, so I see one, I think there will be a tendency, we will be rethinking of our own domestic development, economic development, industrialization policies, incentives. I think there will be, we have remained largely an agrarian society, but we neglected agro-industries. I think we'll be going back towards agro-industries. I mentioned regionalism. I see from this adversity a new opportunity, window of opportunity opening up for regional cooperation in South Asia. I mean, we still remain hostage to the trauma of 47. There was a fear that the narrative of the 30s were being revised. You mentioned about the trust. I see a huge trust deficit developing in the last couple of years. And all the hard work that diplomats like me and others put in to kickstart regional cooperation suddenly came to a halt with a very strong anti-bias developing internally. Now, I'm not going to go deeper into that. I think everybody will know what I mean, but we were moving away, we were moving towards a sense of region, and suddenly you're back into defining, setting up walls and defining yourselves, redefining yourselves. That's going to create huge problems. We don't want that coming. So that's why I welcomed the move made by Mr. Modi personally to reconvene the SAARC. It's not going to be an overnight revival, but at least I think it's maybe out of the ICU. It's out of life support, but not necessarily out of intensive care here. Okay. Certainly, I see connectivities can be revived, at least in what was traditionally or historically the Bengal presidency area, which will then expand eastward and westward. There's a question here about landlocked countries. And I've always told my friends in the Northeast, whenever I traveled all over the long Northeast, 8 years I was in India, and Nepal and Bhutan, that this narrative of being landlocked is only 75 years old. Before that, there were centuries when you were water linked. Now, when we severed the water linkages, we disconnected every form of connectivity, including cultural connectivity. Upstream and downstream industries connected with a flourishing river economy disappeared. That is where perhaps I see a hope. We redefine our priorities. We redefine the way we connect. We redefine or we look at ourselves at an expanded South Asian connectivity, an expanded South Asian region once more. Yes, we are separate sovereign entities, but we can still be working together for our own economic revival. I think we have to, because otherwise I don't see how we can revive. We're looking at the Bay of Bengal community, maybe. That's something I'm working on here in Dhaka. Everybody's been talking about harvesting the blue economy, but the blue economy from the Bay of Bengal may be zero because there are two immediate dangers which the Bay of Bengal faces ecologically. There's a 64,000 square kilometers of a dead zone perilously close to the borders of Orissa and Bengal. Now, if the dead zone keeps, because it's the nature of the vortices of the ocean currents and the wind, it somehow pushes it northwest. Okay, that's one. Number two, if you look at plastic pollution, the marine plastic pollution, most of the Indian Ocean escapes it. Things coming from the eastern side, east of the Bay of Bengal, they bypass the Indian Ocean, go into the Atlantic, but the accumulation is happening only in the Bay of Bengal, again because of the force of currents and the wind. And by 2050, the Bay of Bengal might become a plastic soup, as these plastic soups exist both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. Where are we? What golden goose is going to lay the egg for us? Okay, so I think there is an opportunity now which we will be forced to come and work together to preserve our own ecosystem, to work together first. And I think we will then redefine the new globalization, building the regional building blocks or stepping stones and expanding outwards. It's not going to happen in one leap. There has got to be patience. The trust deficit is in different places among different countries and different people. That has to be, I agree, that has to be restored first. And this will not be a deficit which can be imposed by victors over defeated. This will have to be something which will have to come consensually. And hard work is required. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions from our attendees. Okay.
You can just read out if there are some questions on the chat box.
Yeah. Purushottam, Paulo, if you are hearing us, you can directly ask your questions to our panelist, or I can read from your chat box.
I see 2, 3 questions here, but I think I addressed all of them. I think so.
Let me briefly say something about Purushottamji's question.
Okay,
when we talk about globalization, we have shades of globalizing force, like MNCs. We may not be able to do away with the multinational empires like Coca-Cola, Starbucks, McDonald's. That has been one set of force of globalization. Of course, when we talk about the globalization will be very much there, as I already mentioned, we have got the assembly line type of production facilities. Now, we cannot break the global supply chain. And this COVID crisis is another test. What extent the global community can cooperate in terms of invention of vaccine and cure, and then the commercial production of it and sharing with the other countries which have got the larger populations and larger need of support. So that will in a larger way define. Of course, the efficacy of the global institutions we have trusted for last 70 years, like UN, the former GATT and now WTO. So these institutions also probably need to prove themselves very much, living, and then the contextual in the changing sort of scenario. And as Ambassador Ray very appropriately mentioned it, is the new order, both Professor Ambassador Tariq also. See, the regionalism is very important. The concept that was sort of envisioned decades ago remain in varied degree of success. If you look at ASEAN, it has relatively been successful in integrating the regional economy. There are other platforms, BIMSTEC and others, but unfortunately, since we happen to be a majority of us from the SAARC, so economic integration at the SAARC region has been very marginal. I think this is perhaps also the time that we increased our the channels, different channels, trade, connectivity, the transport, transit, and also the cooperation in the service sector like health. In education, there has been a larger kind of sort of transactions, I would say, if that is the appropriate word. But I think we need to reinvent all these aspects in regionalism, which is going to be sustainable in the long run. And even in the national level policy reflections, that can sort of incorporate in our policy formulation processes. That will help solve a lot of problems, I guess. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe we can take the brief comment from all of our panelists about the China-led economic order, a global order, because with the COVID-19 pandemic, many experts are also predicting that the power which is already shifted towards the China will be more with this COVID-19 pandemic, it will be more easier for for China to lead the world. So maybe we can have a very brief comment about this, and then we can end the discussion. Your perception about the China-led whole order.
Do you want me to speak again first, or I'll speak
Yeah,
last?
okay. Maybe we can start from Tariq, sir.
Yeah, I just want to mention one word, and I think one of the panelists mentioned earlier. We have to stop this finger pointing. This is one of the things which is leading to, at this point, this is a virus. It has displayed an amazing ability to mutate. A team in Bangladesh, they have done the genome analysis of the virus. This is the 9th, the virus here is the 9th mutation of the original virus. So it has displayed a remarkable resilience. It's almost as if it is intelligent. It is, it's eerie. It hops across, it takes a new host, it says, okay, this host is going to behave in this way, I'm going to behave in another way. So even if a vaccine comes out, is it going to be against type A, B, C, D, E? We've had vaccines before against specific diseases, and you have to take multiple shots to make yourself. So we have to learn to live with this virus for a long time. That's point number one. Taking that as the starting point, we have to build up our, I think Mr. Casaca mentioned about the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu is a misnomer because there are two theories, and I've read more leaning on the fact that you can rename it as the American flu because it came from a farming community, obscure farming community in Kansas. Somebody got it from a pig farm. He traveled to Spain for some business or other. Somebody got infected there. Then it went into the World War I trenches, although Spain was not a party to World War I. Spain was an innocent bystander which was first hit, and then it just multiplied. And then the distinction, and I've suggested to my own people here that be prepared, it will come in several waves. The minute you relax, the Spanish flu, the most disastrous period of the Spanish flu was the second wave, not the first wave, because the people let the guards down, and that was just after the armistice, and it just spread. It overwhelmed the system. Now, in our part of the world, our hospital infrastructure system is extremely weak. Weaknesses in different levels, in different capacities in different countries, but overall very weak. And if suddenly there's a bursting forth of this, we will not be able to cope with it. Already the hospitals are not accepting the normal patients, normal meaning those not with the flu. Anyone who comes in there, because their beds are full. So we should stop pointing fingers and saying this came from there or from there or whatever. This is a common problem. It will affect all of us. We have to pool resources. I think I see signs of that happening already in South Asia between India and Bangladesh and even Pakistan. Pharmaceutical industries are cooperating. We have the capacity to manufacture some of the drugs which have been approved. So I think we'll probably be the first. We'll be helping each other across borders.
Thank you.
And then focus on tackling the issue, not on pointing fingers and finding who's to blame. That will come later. Let that be something for the historians to determine. Thank you.
Okay. Any final take, Dr. Fabian? Or okay, Ranjit, sir.
Yeah, I would agree that, this is a global problem. It cannot be solved by one country alone. It has to be solved through cooperation, bilaterally, regionally, globally. Just to give you an instance, in South Asia, for instance, India and Nepal share open borders. So we have to collaborate to resolve this problem, with each other. So I agree entirely that this needs very strong regional and global cooperation. And I think the manner in which the world is going, I don't think we are, going into a situation where one country is going to lead the world. I think we are going to have, of course, there is a big contestation going on right now between the two superpowers, both in terms of economics, in terms of politics, security-related issues. But I think we are, it's not as if, the whole world is run by two superpowers. I think, we are moving towards a multipolar world. And as I said, no one country can lead anything. Each, there are different, there are different powers in different parts of the world. So we are moving to, how shall I say? I mean, I don't want to say we're moving back to sort of a Cold War type of situation, but we are moving to a much more complex world order. And of course, let's see what happens in the United States in the elections. I think some of it will depend on that.
Okay, sir. Paulo, sir, any final thoughts? Very briefly, if you want. Paulo, sir, any final thoughts you want to put?
I think, if I may.
Okay, yeah.
Well, just reflecting on having to live with the virus, I think this is the case. I mean, we do not know if, as in the case of the Spanish flu, although, there is absolutely nothing in common in terms of the proportion. The Spanish flu, of course, the second wave, the third wave were worse than the first, but it was dozens of millions of victims in a world that was much smaller than it is now. And we are speaking about 300,000 this time. I mean, we can compare it rather with a Hong Kong flu of '68 than in terms of the dimension. That's not really, it's not at all the dimension of the Spanish flu. But I do agree that we have to live with it. I mean, nobody knows if it will come back in winter in the northern hemisphere temperate countries, as it's happened with the Spanish flu. But it might as well happen, and we have to learn to live with it. And we cannot go on the issue of, oh, we are waiting for the vaccination. The reasons you mentioned are very important. Yes, and this might be even one of these illnesses where you really do not develop a defense mechanism, because most of there, in parallel with the Spanish flu, most of the victims are victims of the only defense system that becomes berserk and goes attacking everything. So I think that we have to learn to live with it. The issue has to have trusts to see, well, there are things to be done. People are not dying all the same. There are medicines, and if you are healthy, your capacity to survive is much higher. Of course, you have no insurance, and in the long run, we are all dead, as we all know. But this is the most important thing, to have these trusts. And then, if you have some trust, if you get out of this psychosis, because I think our drama is the psychosis, more than the virus is the psychosis, then a lot of reasonable things might be thought of. As has been mentioned before, the SARC revival out of the virus was really a brilliant thing. It was a very interesting. I was, SADF was when it was founded was exactly on the idea of the SARC as reviving the SARC is really the biggest dream, and I think it is there again. And what we have to think is how to answer, in all of these questions. There is one particular question that is absolutely fundamental, Asvin Parajuli, I'm mid-25, what am I going to do in my life? That's the most important thing. I'm 62, it's not so important. But this gentleman is 25, and most of you in South Asia, you are very young. You have to think about these people. What is the life you will have in front of you? And that's what we have to think, how to do it, how to cooperate, how to strengthen our capacities. And this is really my wish that I would like to give to all of the panelists and to all of those who are listening to us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Fabian, your final thoughts?
Yes, and sorry, I'm having some problems hearing, so apologies for that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the brief point that I think we have to recognize that, yes, this particular crisis is something which is occupying all of our time and all of our focus at the moment, but it's not going to be the last crisis. And in fact, we already have some global issues which we haven't dealt with effectively so far. The climate change issue clearly is going to still be on the agenda, and we are talking about an issue which in the end is an existential issue for mankind. So we need to be able to address these global issues much more effectively in future. So yes, we do need a new global world order. We need to recognize that there is global interdependence on all of these issues. And for me, this means this is not about a particular country leading this. This is not about a particular region of the world leading this. This is about finding the common ground in terms of values, in terms of objectives, in terms of aims, which we can all work together at the global level, and then creating the institutions which can translate that from objectives into action, into reality. And that we have so far not done. And the global world order we have had up to now has not delivered that. And we need it. We need it to deal with issues like climate change. We need it to deal with issues like international terrorism. We need it for issues which are going to emerge in future. This will not be the last pandemic we are going to see. We need to prepare for those future crises as well. And that can only be done together. And I think that is the big challenge we're all facing.
Okay. I think with this, we need to end this webinar. So I like to thank you all for your participation and valuable thoughts. So AIDIA is also looking forward to the similar participation in different platforms that we are planning in the future. So we are really thankful to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.